I was already 60 years old the night my only son stood at the front of that rented banquet room and told a room full of people that everyone was sick of me. The ceiling lights were turned down just low enough to make the fake candles on the tables look romantic. There were gold and white balloons tied to the chairs, slumped a little from the heat. The slideshow Jenna had made was looping on a big TV in the corner. Pictures of me at 20 in my student nurse uniform, holding baby Mark in the old brown recliner, standing in front of the same house with my late husband, Tom. Every few seconds, another picture of my life flashed by while forks clinked against plates and somebody laughed too loud at something that wasn't funny. It smelled like overcooked salmon and buttered rolls, the kind of food you only tolerate because someone else is paying for it. My name, Linda, was spelled out in glitter letters on a banner that said 60 and fabulous. But there was no mom, no grandma, anywhere. Just 60. Like I was a number first and a person second. Mark was standing near the cake table with the microphone, grinning that host's grin he used on clients. His tie was a little loose, his cheeks already pink from the wine. When he tapped the mic, it screeched for a second and everybody went quiet. He wrapped one arm around my shoulders and pulled me up halfway from my chair, kissed the top of my head like a prop, then set me back down so he could have the spotlight. "So," he said, voice a little too loud, "we are here to celebrate my mom, the woman who calls me more than my boss does." People laughed. It was the easy kind of laugh people give because they don't want to be the only one not laughing. I smiled because that's what I'd always done. Smile. Make it easy. "She's a talker," he went on. "If you have ever tried to get off the phone with my mom, you know it's a 3-day process." More laughter. "She always needs something. Mark, my computer's broken. Mark, my faucet's dripping. Mark, can you come look at this noise the refrigerator's making?" He held the mic like a stand-up comedian, pacing a little. I watched the way his shoulders loosened each time the room rewarded him. I could smell his cologne when he passed behind my chair, sharp and expensive, mixing with the warm, greasy smell of the food. My stomach twisted, but my face stayed neutral. I'd learned that from years at the hospital. Hold the expression, let the heart race in private. "Mark's dramatic," he said, drawing out the word. "Everything is an emergency. If she can't find her keys, it's the end of the world." An uncomfortable ripple moved through the tables. Some of my coworkers shifted, glanced at me. My old neighbor, Mr. Franklin, stared into his iced tea. My cousin Brian chuckled, eyes on his phone where he'd been scrolling all evening. I could feel the air change before the words came. It's something you learn as a nurse and a mother. Storms have a temperature. Mark's smile twitched, his jaw clenched just a little. He said, "Honestly, everyone's sick of it, Mom. We're all tired of your drama." The room dropped into silence so fast it felt physical, like a door slamming shut. My ears started ringing, and for a second I thought my blood pressure had spiked. My cheeks burned hot, like someone had slapped me. I felt every eye in that room swivel toward me, some sharp with curiosity, some soft with pity, some, I swear, almost relieved that it was me under the spotlight and not them. Across the table, little Mia froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. Her big brown eyes jumped from her father to me. Her lips parted, like she wanted to say something but didn't know if she was allowed. Jenna was standing near the bar, phone in her hand, angling it to catch Mark in a flattering shot. When he said those words, her eyebrows lifted for half a second, but she didn't flinch. She just reached out, touched his arm lightly, and murmured, loud enough for the front table to hear, "He's just being honest." Then she took a sip of her cocktail. Honest. That word cut deeper than sick of ever could. It hit me then that this wasn't a slip. This wasn't a joke that went a little too far. This was what my son and his wife really thought of me. What they probably been saying about me in kitchens I wasn't invited into, in text threads I would never see. Mark kept talking, trying to justify himself, his voice cracking just a little as he said, "We all love you, Mom, but you always make everything about you. You create problems. You make us walk on eggshells." His free hand was shaking. Whether from anger or alcohol, I couldn't tell. I saw one of the waiters pause with a tray of empty glasses, eyes wide. The restaurant manager took a step closer to the edge of the room, sensing something was wrong, but not sure if he should intervene. The slideshow kept playing in the corner, my younger self frozen in time with a birthday cake, smiling at a husband who wasn't alive to see this. Inside me, something old and tired lay very still and watched. Jenna didn't look embarrassed. She looked annoyed, like Mark was making a scene that might ruin the photos. My cousin Brian stared harder at his phone. No one moved to put a hand on my shoulder. No one said, "Hey man, that's your mother." And sitting there with my napkin twisted tight in my fingers, I realized that I was the only one in that room who knew the full truth. They didn't know about the meeting at Miss Patel's office, the neat stacks of paper on her desk. They didn't know about the bank statements I'd requested or the separate account I'd opened without a word to Mark. They didn't know that 3 weeks earlier, in a sterile doctor's office that smelled like alcohol swabs, I'd passed a cognitive evaluation with flying colors. They didn't know that the woman they were trying to bury alive had already moved her own grave marker. They thought I was helpless. They thought I was trapped. They thought I needed them to survive. Mark took a breath like he was going to keep going. The host, a young woman with tired eyes and a practiced smile, started to step forward to gently reclaim the mic. She looked like she had seen too many family meltdowns during special occasions. Before he could reach him, I pushed my chair back and stood up. My knees ached the way they always did after a long day on my feet, but my hands were steady, steadier than they had any right to be. "Mark," I said, my voice cutting through the murmur that had started around the room, "give me the microphone." He turned, surprised, the charm slipping for a second. "Mom, Now," I said, not loud, just firm, the way I used to say his name when he was 10 and about to do something stupid.
There was a flicker in his eyes, something that remembered that tone from years ago. He hesitated. Then, almost unconsciously, he handed me the microphone. The rubber of the handle felt warm from his grip. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but on the outside, I was calm. I looked around at all those faces, friends, coworkers, people from church, distant cousins, and I knew I needed to take them back with me for a moment before we all watched my birthday turn into something else. I should probably start this story long before tonight, I said, bringing the mic up and hearing my own voice amplified, old and steady and a little tired. But you need to know this much right now. This was the night my son found out what tired really looks like. I took a breath, and in my mind, I stepped backward in time. My name is Linda Carter. I was a nurse for 35 years at the same hospital. The walls there saw me go from a 25-year-old with a fresh license and a cheap pair of sneakers to a woman whose feet throbbed even when she was off her shift. That hospital smelled like my second home. Bleach and coffee, sweat and baby powder, sometimes flowers in the halls when someone was well enough to go home. I lived most of my adult life in a modest little house on a street where you could hear lawnmowers and kids on bikes and, late at night, the distant siren song of ambulances heading toward the place where I worked. The house was nothing special. Faded siding, original kitchen cabinets from the 70s, a porch with peeling paint. But it was the place where we measured Mark's height in pencil on the pantry doorframe, where we made birthday pancakes on chipped plates, where my husband tracked mud in after mowing the lawn and swore he'd clean it later. Tom died when Mark was 18. One minute we were sitting at the table arguing over nothing, a cable bill he'd forgotten to pay, I think. And the next, he was holding his chest and sliding out of his chair. The paramedics came fast, but not fast enough. I rode in the ambulance not as a nurse, but as a wife. I knew from the look in their eyes what the chances were. For months after, I could still see the way the fluorescent lights of the ER bounced off the metal of the crash cart, smelled the faint copper of blood and the sharp sting of antiseptic. After that, it was just me and my boy. Mark was my whole world. I know people say that and it sounds dramatic, but it was the truth. I worked nights so I could be there for his school events. I sat at the kitchen table with him while he did algebra. My scrubs still smelled like hospital disinfectant, my hair pinned back with a cheap clip. There were nights he fell asleep on my chest while I reviewed patient charts, his drool soaking through my uniform, his soft snore in my ear. I remember thinking over and over, it's just us now, baby, just us. We didn't have much, but we had routines. Friday night spaghetti, even if the sauce was mostly canned tomatoes and whatever herbs were on sale. I'd let it simmer while I sewed little extras onto his Halloween costumes. Felt claws, a cape made from an old curtain. He'd sit at the table and talk about whatever game he was into, waving his fork like a sword, and I'd listen like it was the most important thing in the world. Tom had started a small joint savings account before he died. He called it the future. Every paycheck, he put a little in. After he was gone, I kept it up. Even when I took on extra shifts just to keep the mortgage paid, I'd drop a few dollars in there. I never really thought of it as mine. In my head, it was for Mark's college, Mark's wedding, Mark's first house. My name was on those papers, yes, but in my heart, the money already had his name on it. That's how mothers think. Or at least, that's how I did. The first signs that something was off, I pushed aside. It's easy to ignore a bruise if you cover it with a sweater. When Mark was in his 20s and would come by with some girl or another, he'd sometimes roll his eyes when I told a story he'd heard before. "We know, Mom, you've told that one 1,000,000 times." The girls would laugh politely. I'd laugh too, pretend I was in on the joke. But inside, something would tighten. When he met Jenna, she came in like a gust of perfume and Instagram filters. She was pretty, no doubt about it. Smooth hair, smooth skin, smooth words. Her nails always matched her lipstick. She took pictures of everything, the food, the dog, the way the light hit the kitchen window. The first time I saw myself tagged in one of her posts, the filter had smoothed my wrinkles into a strange plastic version of my own face. "Oh, Linda," she said once, looking at my church dress, a simple navy thing I'd had for years. "You're so cute in your little old lady style." She laughed like it was a compliment. I stood there, holding the bowl of potato salad, wondering when my clothes had become a joke. There were little moments, times when I reached for Mia and Mark would gently steer her away, saying, "Careful, she smells like hospital again." He said it like a joke, but the way Jenna's nose wrinkled told me it wasn't. Then came the move. "Mom, we just want you closer," Mark said over dinner at their house one night. The TV was blaring some reality show, his phone kept buzzing on the table, and Mia was watching cartoons on a tablet with her headphones on. It's safer, Jenna chimed in, stirring her salad around her plate. We could get your house sold for a good price. There are some nice condos near us. Plus, you'll be closer to Mia. Isn't that what you want? It was. Of course it was. I wanted to be near my granddaughter. I wanted to be part of their lives. So I agreed to move closer to them, but when the time came, Mark said, the market wasn't right to sell my house yet. We'll just leave it for now. No need to rush. My things stayed where they were. I kept my little house. I thought that was a blessing. What I didn't realize then was that they liked having my house in their future plans more than they liked seeing me in it. Little by little, my home became their storage unit. Mark's old tools, boxes of Jenna's seasonal decorations, bags of clothes for donation that never went anywhere, all ended up in my garage. We'll sort it out later, they'd say, dropping things off before rushing back to their lives. Mom, can you watch Mia this Saturday? Became as regular as the mail. Sometimes it was asked, sometimes it was assumed. Laundry started showing up in big plastic baskets since your washer is better, Jenna said, even though mine was older than their marriage. I didn't mind at first. I loved having Mia around. Her little sneakers in my hallway made the house feel alive again. But there were cracks. At family dinners in their house, the TV was always on and no one looked up from their phones. If I'd tried to tell a story from work or from back when your daddy was alive, Mark would cut in. Mom, you already told that one, he'd say over the sound of some home renovation show. Everyone would laugh. You're like one of those Facebook memory posts. I'd laugh too, cheeks hot, and tell myself I was being sensitive. I'd rinse my plate in their sink, listening to them chatter about hashtags and follower counts, and I'd feel like my life was being pushed to the edges, like old wallpaper they meant to tear down someday. I remember the first time Jenna brought up assisted living in that light, casual voice people use when they're testing the water. We went to visit my grandma in this place last week, she said, scrolling through photos on her phone. It was so nice. Yoga classes, game nights. Some of the ladies had hair nicer than mine, she laughed. We should get you on a wait list, Linda. One day you're going to love it. You can talk all day and people are paid to listen. Mark smirked. We'll find a place where you can tell your stories on repeat. They'll clap every time. The words landed in me like stones. I smiled, took a sip of lukewarm coffee, and changed the subject. But that stone, it lodged somewhere deep.
Looking back, I can see that the explosion at the birthday dinner didn't come out of nowhere. It started with 100 tiny cuts I kept covering with love. The big wound, though, came months before that night, at my own kitchen table. It was a Sunday morning. The house smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner. I'd wiped the counters twice already because my hands needed something to do. Mark had called the night before and said he wanted to have a family meeting. Those words made my stomach drop because, in my experience, nothing good ever followed them. He arrived with Jenna and Mia in tow, a manila folder tucked under his arm. Mia ran in first, arms open, hugging my waist. I held her, breathed in the smell of crayons and shampoo, and for a moment, everything felt normal. Then Mark said, "Mia, go watch your show in the living room, sweetheart. Mommy and Daddy need to talk to Grandma about some grown-up stuff." Something in his tone made me put an extra cookie in her hand before she went. We sat at the table, the same one where I used to help him with his homework. Mark spread out papers between us, pamphlets, printed emails, a brochure with smiling gray-haired people playing cards in some bright, clean space. "Everyone is worried about you, Mom," he started, folding his hands like a man with a presentation to deliver. Everyone. That word did something to me. "Everyone who?" I asked, voice calm. He sighed. "Me, Jenna, Aunt Leela, even Pastor James mentioned that you've seemed overwhelmed lately. I thought of the one time I'd forgotten my purse at church and had to drive back for it after service. Overwhelmed. You live alone, Mark went on. You're still working, which, honestly, you shouldn't be at your age. You left the burner on that one time. You keep misplacing your keys. We're just concerned. The one time I'd left the burner on, I'd been distracted by a phone call. I'd caught it within minutes. But now in his mouth, it became evidence. Jenna nodded, pulling one of the pamphlets closer. She said, "We just want what's best for you. Some of these places are so nice. You'd have friends your own age, activities. You wouldn't be stuck in this old house by yourself." Stuck. That's how she saw my home. A trap, not a shelter. My eyes dropped to the brochure. The people in the photos were smiling, but their eyes looked tired. Or maybe that was just my fear reflected back at me. I noticed the fine print, saying, "starting at." The numbers made my head swim. He slid a paper toward me. "We think it's time to think about selling the house. Free up some cash for your care. It's too much for you to handle. The yard, the maintenance, the stairs, it's just not safe anymore." My safe place had become a burden. My life's work had become cash for my care. I felt my throat tighten. "I'm still working," I said slowly. "I'm paying my bills. The house is fine." Mark's jaw tensed. "For now," he said. "But you're not getting any younger, Mom. We can get a good price for this place while the market's up. I've already talked to a realtor, just to get a sense of what it's worth." There it was, the part he hadn't meant to say out loud, the planning he'd done without me. "You talked to a realtor?" I repeated, my hands starting to shake. I reached for my coffee cup to hide it and sloshed some onto the table. The dark liquid spread toward a picture-perfect dining hall. I grabbed a napkin and dabbed at it, my cheeks burning. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement in the hallway. Mia, clutching her stuffed rabbit, peeking around the doorway. Her little face was tight, confused. "Don't be ungrateful," Mark snapped, the charm gone. "We're trying to help you. You've had your life, Mom. We're trying to live ours. We're tired of walking on eggshells around you. Every time we bring something up, you act like we're attacking you." Eggshells. I thought of all the times I'd swallowed my hurt to keep the peace, laughed off insults to keep the mood light. "I'm just surprised," I said, forcing my voice not to shake. "You've been making plans about my house without me." He threw his hands up. "Because you never want to talk about anything serious. You just guilt trip. 'Oh, I sacrificed so much. I worked so hard.' Yes, Mom, we know. You've had your life. Now let us handle things." He glanced at Jenna, who pressed her lips together and nodded like a supportive co-host. "We're thinking about the future," she said. "About Mia. We can't keep worrying that something's going to happen to you alone in this creaky place." He'd said everyone's worried, but somehow it felt less like worry and more like inconvenience, like my continued independence was a problem they needed to solve. In that moment, something inside me wavered dangerously between shame and fury. Shame that maybe I was a burden, that maybe I was selfish for wanting to stay in my own home. Fury that my son could look at the walls that watched him grow up and see only dollar signs. I looked at his hands on the table. I remember those same hands sticky with peanut butter, clutching crayons, tugging at my uniform when he had nightmares. Now they were tapping impatiently at a brochure that would erase me from the center of my own life. I swallowed. "I'll think about it." It was the only answer I could give without breaking. His shoulders dropped, but not in relief, in victory. "Good," he said, "because we can't keep doing this." Doing what? I wanted to ask. Letting me have a life? After they left, the house felt heavier than it ever had. I watched the coffee cup, the sound of the running water, the only noise in the kitchen. I wiped the table again, though it was already clean. I walked to the doorway where Mia had been and put my hand on the frame, right next to the faint pencil marks of Mark's childhood heights. My fingers touched the dates, age 8, 9, 10, my handwriting looping beside them. That night I lay in bed, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant rush of the highway outside my window, the only sounds. The ceiling looked back at me blank and uncaring. I turned to my side and whispered into the dark, "Tom, if you left me anything, I need to know now." It wasn't just a prayer about money. It was about strength, about whether I had any fight left in me, or if I was going to let my own child decide when I was done living. After that family meeting, things didn't calm down. They escalated, but not in big, obvious ways at first. That's the tricky thing about a certain kind of cruelty. It comes dressed in concern. Mark started helping with my bills. "Let me set up online banking for you," he insisted. "You're not good with computers, Mom. You could mess something up." He took my laptop, clicked around while I watched, and before I knew it, my paper statements stopped showing up. He said, "You don't need all that mail cluttering the house. I'll keep an eye on things for you." I told myself it was practical. He was busy. He was good with numbers. I'd always hated online forms. But a little knot formed in my stomach every time I thought about not seeing those envelopes in my mailbox. One afternoon, I was checking my email on my phone, something he couldn't intercept yet, and saw an alert from the bank about a new transaction. I logged in, the way Market showed me, and stared at a line item I didn't recognize. A transfer. A sizable one. When I asked him about it standing in my own kitchen while he leaned against my counter eating one of my apples, he shrugged. "Oh, I covered the cost of some repairs on your roof, remember? I just reimbursed myself. It was easier that way. Paperwork is a nightmare."
I remembered him on my roof one Saturday with a friend, beer bottles lined up along the porch railing. I also remembered seeing the receipt from the handyman I'd paid earlier that month. My gut twisted. "You didn't ask me," I said. My voice was quiet, but he rolled his eyes like I was shouting. "Mom, relax," he said. "It's my time, my gas, my tools. You want me to send you an invoice next time?" He laughed, but there was a sharp edge to it. "You're getting paranoid. Is this what we're dealing with now?" That word, paranoid. It floated in the air like a threat. I'd heard enough stories at the hospital to know where that kind of language could lead. Evaluations, guardianships, losing the right to sign your own name on your own papers. At a barbecue in their backyard one weekend, I overheard Jenna talking to one of her friends near the grill. The smell of charcoal and lighter fluid hung in the air. Kids were running around, sticky with juice and sunscreen. "She's struggling," Jenna was saying, her voice pitching up at the end like it made her sound compassionate. "We're probably going to have to move her somewhere safe soon. It's just a lot, you know. She forgets things. It's not fair to Mark to carry all that." I was standing 4 feet away, refilling the potato salad. She didn't lower her voice. She didn't look at me. Her friend made a sympathetic noise. "You're such a good daughter-in-law," she said. A good daughter-in-law would have asked me how I was doing. A good son would have told his wife to stop talking about my mother like I was already in a facility somewhere, drooling into my soup. Instead, a few days later, he called and said, "If you refuse to cooperate, we may have to talk to a doctor about getting something on record, about your memory. I mean, you're forgetting things, Mom. Everyone sees it." It was like someone had pressed an ice pack against my spine. In all my years of nursing, I'd seen families use that line. Sometimes it was out of love, truly trying to protect someone who'd lost their way. Sometimes it was not. "Are you saying," I asked slowly, "that you tried to take away my ability to make my own decisions?" He huffed. "No one's trying to take anything away. We're trying to have options, but you're making it hard." That night, I sat in my quiet living room and realized something that broke my heart and then put it back together in a new shape. My son would not protect me. If anything, he was the one I needed protection from. Around that time, my body reminded me I was not as young as my mind tried to be. One rainy evening in the hospital parking lot, I slipped on a slick patch of oil and went down hard. Pain shot up my hip. A younger nurse helped me up, fussing over me, and I laughed it off. "I've fallen harder than that," I said, but the bruise the next day was deep and purple. When Mark heard about it, because of course someone mentioned it to him in that "we're concerned" tone, he turned it into his favorite story. "She fell in the parking lot," he told people, shaking his head. "Can't be alone much longer. It's just not safe." The fall hurt, but that stung more. Quietly, without telling him, I started fighting back in the only ways I knew how at first. At the hospital HR office, I asked the young woman behind the desk to print my last several years of retirement documents. She clicked and scrolled, asked for my ID, then handed me a small stack of papers that felt heavier than anything I'd carried that week. At home, I pulled out the old metal cash box from the top of my closet. I hadn't opened it in years. It smelled faintly of metal and old paper. Inside were Tom's original will, some insurance forms, a few handwritten notes we'd made when Mark was little. Seeing Tom's handwriting again, the slant of his L, the way he made his T look like a cross, made my chest ache. There was a name scribbled on one sticky note, half faded. Patel Estate. We'd never followed up back then. Life had been too busy. Death had felt too far away. I closed my eyes for a second. "Thank you," I whispered to no one in particular. I went next door to my neighbor and friend, Darlene, with a plate of brownies. It was my excuse. She opened the door in her house robe, gray hair and rollers, her TV murmuring some game show in the background. "You made the good ones," she said, ushering me in. "What's wrong?" I hadn't said a word yet, but she saw it in my face. We sat at her kitchen table, the plastic tablecloth sticking slightly to my forearms, and I told her, not everything, just enough. The meeting at my house, the talk of putting me somewhere, the bank stuff that didn't feel right. "I went through the same mess with my oldest," she said, shaking her head, eyes flashing. "Girl, listen to me. You need a good estate lawyer, not that cousin who does divorces, somebody who lives and breathes this stuff." I mentioned the name on Tom's old note, Mrs. Patel. "Anika Patel," Darlene said. "I know her. She helped my sister when her son tried to snatch her house out from under her. She's good, tough, but gentle. I'll go with you if you want." There is nothing like having someone believe you when you've been told you're overreacting. That night, I took a little notebook from my bedside drawer, the one I used to keep my blood pressure readings in, and I started writing something new. Dates, times, things Mark said. "We may need to talk to a doctor. Everyone's tired of walking on eggshells. The transfer from my account. The fall he loved to repeat." I didn't know exactly what I'd do with those notes, but writing it down made me feel less crazy. It was proof. For me, if no one else. A week later, Darlene and I sat in a small, tidy office that smelled like coffee and printer ink. The blinds were half open, letting in a slant of light across a bookshelf full of thick binders. A little plant on the windowsill tried its best to stay green under the fluorescent buzz. Mrs. Patel was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s. Her black hair was pulled back in a low bun, and she wore simple gold earrings. Her desk was neat, no clutter, just a calendar, a mug that said "World's Okayest Lawyer," and a pad of paper where she wrote notes in tidy handwriting as I spoke. I told her everything. My voice shook at first, but as the words came, they gathered strength. The family meeting, the bank access changing, the way Mark talked about my fall, the threats about doctors and evaluations. Darlene sat beside me, occasionally reaching over to squeeze my hand when my breath hitched. When I slid Tom's old will across the desk, along with the retirement papers HR had printed, Mrs. Patel's brows drew together in concentration. She flipped pages, eyes moving fast. She asked quiet questions. When did you sign this? Who had access to this account? Have you ever given him power of attorney? Each time I answered as best as I could. Finally, she put her pen down and looked up at me. Her expression had changed from neutral professional to something else. Something like anger, but not at me. Linda, she said, her voice calm but firm, you realize you're not helpless here, right?
The words landed like a small earthquake. What do you mean? I asked. Years of feeling like the weaker one made it hard to imagine any other position. She tapped Tom's will. Your husband left everything to you, she said. Not to your son, to you. You are the sole owner of the house. These beneficiary forms, she lifted another page, show that you are the primary beneficiary of this retirement account. It has grown quite a bit over the years, quietly, she added, with a tiny smile. You've been taking care of yourself better than you thought. I stared at the numbers. They didn't look real. They looked like someone else's life. What about Mark? I asked softly. Doesn't he have some claim? She shook her head. Not automatically. While you're alive and mentally competent, which you clearly are, he has no legal right to any of this unless you give it to him. And from what you're telling me, he is already acting as if it's his. That is a problem for him. I felt my shoulders drop, like I'd been carrying something heavy and didn't realize it until she took part of the weight. What about the bank stuff? I asked. He set up everything online. I don't see paper statements anymore. There was a transfer I didn't understand. Did you sign any power of attorney paperwork? No, I said. I signed some things years ago for work, for the retirement stuff, but nothing for him. She nodded. Then legally, he cannot be moving your money without your informed consent. We can request full statements and see exactly what's been happening. Some transfers may be reversible. At the very least, we can document it. If he tries to claim you're incompetent after that, it will not look good for him. I thought of my little notebook beside my bed. For the first time, I felt grateful for every line I'd scribbled in the dark. She leaned forward slightly. Here's what I suggest, she said. You let me help you redraw your will. Right now, your old documents would default everything to your son if something happened to you. We can change that. We can set up a trust if you want. Protect your house, protect your accounts. You decide how your story ends, not him. Her words made my throat tighten. But he's my son, I whispered. I'd never pictured cutting him out. Protecting yourself is not revenge, she said gently. It's survival. And you're not cutting him out of your life. You're setting boundaries. If he learns from less, if he changes, you can always update things later. You hold the pen, Linda, not him. A strange image came to my mind then. Mark, shovel in hand, joking about putting me somewhere nice, and me standing there, just letting him dig. I'd been so afraid of losing him that I'd handed him the handle. I nodded slowly. Okay, I said. What do we do first? She smiled. First, we order the bank records. Second, we draft a new will. Third, we get you a current cognitive evaluation from a doctor you trust. That way, if he ever tries to drag you into court claiming you're incompetent, we have paperwork ready to wave in his face.
Darlene let out a small, satisfied sound. I told you she was good. As we left the office that day, the sun felt too bright. The parking lot smelled like exhaust and wet pavement. I stood by my old car, keys in my hand, and for a moment I felt like Tom was standing beside me. I could almost hear him, that low chuckle he had. You thought I left you with nothing, didn't she, Lynn? He seemed to say. Turns out, I left you with more than you knew. The ride home was quiet. Darlene hummed along with the radio. I stared out the window, watching the familiar streets go by. Everything looked the same. But inside, the ground had shifted. I made a decision on that drive. I was not going to confront Mark. Not yet. He had spent months, maybe years, building a story where I was weak and he was the savior. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a big blow-up where he could point and say, see, she's crazy. No. If he wanted to treat me like I was already gone, I could act like I had nothing left to lose. So began the quiet part of my rebellion. Over the next few weeks, I moved carefully. I went back to Miss Patel's office and sat with her while we drafted a new will. We talked about what I wanted, really wanted, if I stripped away the guilt. I told her about Mia, how that little girl's hands fit in mine like they were made to. I told her about the hospital, about the nurses who worked double shifts and still showed up for their patients with a smile. When we were done, the new document said that my house and most of my savings would go into a trust for Mia's education, and after that, a small scholarship fund for caregivers at my hospital. There was a modest portion set aside for Mark, but it came with conditions written in clear, simple language. Respectful contact, no attempts to undermine my care, no financial abuse. Miss Patel worded it so that any evidence of mistreatment could reduce his share to almost nothing. Is that cruel? I asked, looking at the lines that spelled out consequences for my own child. It's fair, she said. You're giving him a choice. He can love you and behave, or he can misbehave and live with the results. Same as any kid, just with bigger numbers. I removed Mark's access to my accounts. I called the bank, spoke to a woman whose voice sounded far too cheerful for the seriousness of the situation, and had my online information reset. My son set it up, I said, keeping my tone light. I'd like everything redirected to me, please, and I'd like paper statements again. I started receiving those envelopes once again and stacked them in an old cookie tin in my pantry, behind the flour. It made me smile every time I reached for sugar and touched my finances instead. I opened a separate savings account at a different bank, one within walking distance of the hospital. Every payday, I transferred a little there, not enough to raise questions, just enough to know I had a safety net my son couldn't see. In the middle of all this planning, life went on. I still worked part-time, the hospital corridors humming with the familiar beeps and buzzes, the faint antiseptic smell clinging to my clothes. One evening, around shift change, I ducked into the locker room and leaned against a row of metal lockers, the cool surface pressing into my back. My eyes burned. It had been a hard day. An old woman with my same tired eyes died alone in her bed. Her son too busy to come say goodbye. I'd held her hand as she took her last breath, listening to her whisper apologies to a child that wasn't there. In that harsh fluorescent light, surrounded by the smell of sweat and disinfectant, I broke. I slid down until I was sitting on the bench, my head in my hands, and I sobbed. Not pretty tears, ugly, raw, chest-heaving sobs. For Tom, for that patient, for myself.
A fellow nurse, Carla, walked in, stopped, and then sat beside me. She didn't say, "You okay?" because we both knew that was a silly question. "My brother did that to my mom," she said after a while, staring at the opposite wall. "Took her pension, sold her car, tried to put her in a home she didn't want.
She ended up in a tiny apartment with a recliner and a TV. You know what she said to me? At least now I can lock my own door. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. People don't talk about it, but it happens all the time. Her words wrapped around my shaking shoulders like a blanket. I wasn't the only one. That mattered more than I expected. A few days later, I went to my own doctor for that cognitive evaluation Miss Patel had suggested. The waiting room smelled like old magazines and hand sanitizer. I did little memory tests and number games, answered questions about dates and names. It felt strange, like I was performing my own mind on command. When it was done, my doctor smiled. "Linda, you're sharper than half my patients 10 years younger," she said. "I'll write up the report. What's this really about?" I told her. "Not everything. Enough." Her face hardened. "Good," she said. "Get your ducks in a row. If they try anything, you call me." Meanwhile, Mark started noticing little things. The first time he tried to log into my bank and failed, he called, acting casual. "Hey, Mom, I think there's an issue with your account. I couldn't see the statements. Did you change something?" "Oh," I said, stirring my tea. "The bank must have updated their system. They sent the login info directly to me. I asked for paper statements again. I'm old-fashioned. You know that." There was a pause on the line. "You should have told me. Now I've got to redo everything." "You're busy," I replied smoothly. "No need for you to worry about my little bills." He grumbled something about being late for a meeting and hung up. I put my phone down and exhaled slowly. One small victory. I wrote the date and his exact words in my notebook later. There were close calls. One afternoon, he dropped by unannounced to check on me. I'd been sitting at the dining table with a folder from Miss Patel spread open, legal language staring back at me. When his car pulled into the driveway, my heart leapt into my throat. I scooped the papers into a stack, but one page skidded to the floor as he walked in. "Hey, Mom," he called. "You forgot to lock the door." "I was just in the kitchen," I said, forcing my voice steady. "Didn't hear you drive up." I watched his eyes scan the room, always assessing, always measuring. As he walked toward the hallway, I spotted that stray piece of paper by the table leg, the one with the words "Last Will and Testament" printed at the top. Panic shot through me. "Actually," I said quickly, "could you check that noise in the basement for me? I thought I heard something rattling earlier. Maybe the water heater?" He sighed, but his ego liked the idea of being the man of the house. "Fine," he said. "Don't fall while I'm gone, okay?" He laughed at his own joke and headed for the basement door. The second I heard his footsteps on the stairs, I grabbed the paper, slid it into the folder, and tucked the whole thing into the linen closet behind a stack of old towels. By the time he came back up complaining about cobwebs and nothing being wrong, I had tea poured and cookies on a plate like nothing had happened. "You've been secretive lately," Jenna commented another time, narrowing her eyes as she glanced around my living room. "New projects, Linda?" Cleaning old stuff," I said lightly. "You know how it is at my age. Downsize, declutter." I smiled. She relaxed. She liked the sound of things leaving my house. One evening, as I watered the geraniums on my front porch, I heard through the open living room window Mark's voice on speakerphone. He was talking to someone, I couldn't tell who. His tone was sharp, frustrated. "She's got money tied up somewhere," he was saying. "I know it. She's playing dumb. Once we get the house sold, things will be easier. I'm just tired, man. I've been carrying her for years." I stood there, the watering can heavy in my hand, water dripping on the floorboards. Carrying me. That's how he saw it. Not as me working double shifts to put him through school, not as me watching his kids so he could go on date nights, but as him carrying dead weight. The next day, I stood at my fridge, looking at the blank space where a calendar had once hung, and I knew I needed something to look forward to. That wasn't just survival.
Something that said, this is my life and I'm still here. So I planned a party. My 60th birthday was coming up. Usually, I would have let them take the lead, let Jenna do her Pinterest magic. This time, I made the call myself. I booked a small banquet room at a mid-range restaurant, not fancy, but nice enough. The coordinator asked me if I wanted a microphone for speeches. Yes, I said, my fingers tightening around the phone. Definitely a microphone. I invited extended family, old coworkers, a couple of church friends, and of course, Mark and his family. On each invitation, I wrote, "Join me as I celebrate 60 years of life." Not Mom's birthday, not Grandma's, mine. In the evenings, with the hum of my old refrigerator in the background and the bathroom fan running to cover the sound, I stood in front of the mirror and practiced my speech. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want to sob. I wanted my words to land like a steady heartbeat. "Thank you for coming," I'd whispered to my reflection. "I know this is awkward." I'd practice saying, "My son has been trying to put me away before my time." I would test out, "I have met with a lawyer." My voice would shake at first. I'd pause, breathe, and start again. Nurses know something about repetition. You do the same task over and over until your hands remember even when your head is tired.
The night before the party, I taped one of the printed invitations to my fridge. The cheap magnet struggled to hold it straight. I traced the date with my fingertip and whispered, half bitter, half hopeful, "Happy birthday to me, I guess." And that is how we got back to the banquet room, to the low lights and lukewarm salmon, to my son at the front of the room with a microphone he did not deserve, telling everyone he was sick of me. When I took that microphone from him, I could feel the decades in my bones. Every night shift, every grocery bill stretched, every time I'd bitten my tongue instead of speaking. I lifted it to my lips and looked out at the faces staring at me. Some were shocked, some were eager. Some looked like they wanted to disappear under the table. "I'm sorry for the awkwardness," I said first, "because old habits die hard. This is not how I imagined my 60th birthday either." A strained chuckle rippled through the room. I saw my old charge nurse, Patrice, nod at me from the back, her eyes kind. I saw Darlene at the second table, leaning forward, hands clasped. I glanced at Mark. His arms were crossed now, his expression annoyed but confident, like he was waiting for me to make a self-deprecating joke and smooth things over. Jenna stood just behind him, lips pressed tight, phone in hand, but not recording anymore. "I want to tell you something," I said. "Not the long version, just some parts you might not know." I talked about the night Tom died. Not in gory detail, just enough. How Tom was 18, how we stood in a hospital hallway together, and I promised him I'd take care of us. How I worked extra shifts, how I kept putting money into an account that was supposed to be for his future. I told them about cleaning houses on my days off so I could pay for his 8th grade trip to Washington, D.C. I scrubbed other people's toilets so he could see the Lincoln Memorial, I said, my voice steady. He thought the money came from the school. I let him think that. People shifted in their seats. I saw one of Mark's coworkers, a man in a suit 2 tables over, look at him with raised eyebrows. I walked to work in the snow so he could sleep in. I skipped lunch so he could have seconds. None of that makes me special. That's just what mothers do. We give. We give until sometimes we forget there's anything left that belongs only to us. I paused, feeling the weight of all those eyes. "A few months ago," I said, My son called a family meeting at my kitchen table. He brought brochures. He brought plans. Not for a vacation, not for a celebration, for my removal. A collective inhale went around the room. Mark's jaw clenched. "Mom, don't," he started, but I held up my free hand. "You've had your turn. It's mine now." I told them, in simple, clear words, how he had exaggerated my forgetfulness, how he had talked about selling my house, how he had joked about finding a place where I could talk and people were paid to listen. I told them how Jenna had spoken about me at barbecues like I wasn't standing right there. I made a mistake. Not with my memory, with my trust. I thought my son would protect me. I thought he would see me as more than a burden, more than a resource. I was wrong. I saw tears in a few eyes. The restaurant staff had stopped moving. Even the bartender was leaning on the counter listening. So, I did something he didn't expect, I continued, the mic steady in my hand. I talked to a lawyer. Mark's head jerked up at that. Jenna's face went pale. Darlene smiled. Just a tiny, fierce smile.
I learned that my house is mine, I said, that my savings are mine, that my mind is mine. I got the doctor's notes. I signed the papers. I changed my will. I let that hang in the air for a second. I removed Mark's access to my bank accounts, I said then, openly, clearly. A murmur went through the room. Any attempts to use my money without my consent are now documented and will be treated as what they are: abuse. I turned my head and looked straight at him. If anyone tries to claim I am not in my right mind, they will be standing in front of a judge looking at fresh medical evaluations that say otherwise. "Mom," he hissed, stepping toward me. "You're embarrassing yourself." I took a small step back out of his reach. "No," I said. "For once, I'm protecting myself." I glanced at Jenna. I am Mia's grandmother, not a free babysitter, not a backup cleaning service. From now on, access to my time and my home will be on my terms, not yours. An aunt near the front table gasped. Someone at the back said, under their breath but loud enough to hear, "Good for her." Jenna's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She looked around, realizing maybe for the first time that other people were seeing her the way I had been seeing her for years. Mark surged forward, hand outstretched for the mic. "You're twisting things," he said. "You're making me look—" The restaurant manager, sensing trouble, stepped closer. "Sir," he said gently, "let her finish." For once, the room was on my side. "I'm not here to make you look any kind of way," I said. "I'm here to tell the truth. You told this room you're sick of me. You said everyone is. I'm just letting everyone know that I am tired too. Tired of being spoken over. Tired of being treated like I'm already in the ground." I turned back to the guests. "Instead of selling my house, I will be renting my spare room to a nurse friend who needs a place to stay. We will look out for each other. The bulk of my estate will go to my granddaughter's education and to a scholarship for caregivers at my hospital, for people who actually know what it means to care for someone." I looked at Mia then, her small hands gripping the back of her chair, her eyes brimming. "And Mia," I added, my voice catching just slightly, "Grandma loves you. That will never change. What will change is how grown-ups around you behave." She slipped out from her chair and walked over to me, her little legs moving fast. She pressed herself against my side, and I put my arm around her shoulders, the mic still in my other hand. "I am done now. Thank you for listening."
I set the microphone down on the table with a soft click. The room was silent for a heartbeat, then someone started clapping. It wasn't enthusiastic. It was careful at first, like people were testing the air. Then more joined in. The sound of hands coming together filled the space where Mark's voice had been moments before.
I walked back to my seat with Mia glued to my side. Mark stood alone at the front of the room, red-faced, his mouth pressed into a hard line. For once, when he looked out over a room full of people, he did not see admiration reflected back. He saw something else. Doubt, maybe. Judgment, or just the uncomfortable realization that he had miscalculated his audience. The party didn't recover. Not really. People ate cake, but the frosting tasted different. Conversations were quieter, more serious. Some people came up to hug me, to whisper, "I'm proud of you," or "I had to do something similar with my brother," or "Call me if you ever need anything." Others avoided my gaze, not ready to confront their own situations. In the days that followed, the family group chat went strangely quiet. No more funny memes from Mark. No more multiple photos of Mia at dance class. Instead, my phone buzzed with individual messages. My sister-in-law wrote, "I'm sorry we didn't see what was happening. I thought you and Mark were just joking, how families do." A cousin sent a long text about her own sons, saying she was going to call her lawyer in the morning. A woman from church called me and cried on the phone for 20 minutes, thanking me for saying out loud what she'd been too afraid to do. Mark's messages were not so kind. "You humiliated me," one text read. "You made me look like some kind of monster in front of everyone." Another said, "You ruined my reputation. People at work heard about it. How could you do that to your own son?" I responded once, just once. I wrote, "All I did was tell the truth. Any further abusive messages will be saved and forwarded to my lawyer." Then I set his contact to Do Not Disturb and let Miss Patel know. She told me to keep screenshots. I did. Jenna disappeared from my online life like a ghost. She unfriended me on social media, removed herself from old photos. Then she sent a long email full of words like boundaries, respect, and toxic. She accused me of weaponizing my victimhood and turning the family against them. I read it once, sighed, and forwarded it to Miss Patel without replying. She said, "Save this too. Patterns matter." There were consequences, real ones. Mark tried to log into my accounts again and found the door shut. He couldn't use my credit card for emergencies anymore. He couldn't dip into my savings to cover the holes his own spending had created. For the first time, he had to stand on his own financial feet without my quiet backing. Word of his behavior traveled through the family and the community. People didn't stop talking to him, but the shine wore off. Invitations slowed. At church, I heard he'd started attending less often. "He seems different now," someone said in the fellowship hall one Sunday, pouring me coffee. I just nodded. At work, his temper apparently flared more often. A mutual acquaintance mentioned that he'd been warned by his boss about unprofessional behavior. The stress he once tried to dump onto my shoulders bounced back toward him, as stress tends to when you refuse to carry it anymore. Mia, a sweet girl, got stuck in the middle. I refused to speak badly about her father in front of her. When she asked why Daddy was mad, I told her, "Sometimes grown-ups have to learn lessons, just like kids do. Grandma is teaching a lesson about respect." That was as far as I went. Children deserve honesty, but not adult burdens. We arranged visits in neutral places at first, parks, ice cream shops. Sometimes Mark dropped her off stiffly, barely meeting my eyes.
Sometimes Jenna brought her and sat in her car scrolling on her phone until it was time to leave. I stayed focused on the small hand in mind, on the sticky ice cream smiles, and on the sound of her laughter as we played in the grass. I was no longer available on demand, but when I showed up, I was fully present. Over time, things settled into a new shape. My relationship with Mark did not miraculously heal. There was no tearful apology in the rain, no overnight transformation until the son I had dreamed of. Sometimes he called on holidays, voice tight. Sometimes months went by with nothing. When he came to the house, he knocked. He waited on the porch until I invited him in. He never joked about putting me away again. Fear will do that. So will boundaries.
Months later, my life looked different, in ways big and small. One sunlit morning, I stood in my kitchen, now a bit less cluttered. I had finally let go of some things I'd been holding on to for years, not because someone told me to, but because I was ready. I'd painted the walls a soft, warm color with the help of a younger nurse from the hospital. The air smelled like coffee and toast. A new clock on the wall ticked steadily, a quiet reminder that time was still moving, with or without my son's approval. Down the hall, the spare bedroom held signs of another life. A suitcase tucked under the bed, a pair of sneakers by the door. I had rented the room to a fellow nurse named Tasha, who was going through a divorce and needed a place to stay. She paid a fair rent, helped carry groceries, and changed the light bulbs without acting like she was doing me a favor. "You sure you're okay with me being here?" she'd asked the first night, perched on the edge of the guest bed. "I'm more than okay," I had replied. "It's nice to have another set of footsteps in the house. As long as we treat each other with respect, we'll be fine." My legal papers were organized in a neat folder in the top drawer of my desk, labeled in clear, black letters, "For Linda." Not for Mark, for me. Ms. Patel had copies too. My notebook, now worn at the edges, sat beside it, full of dates and words and reminders of the line I'd drawn in the sand. On the coffee table lay a half-finished board game from Mia's last visit, little plastic pieces mid-journey. In the kitchen, a bag of flour and a rolling pin waited for the next batch of cookies we'd promised to bake together. I've found that by saying no more often, the yeses I gave grew sweeter. I no longer answered every call from Mark immediately. I no longer jumped at every request. When he asked if I could watch Mia last minute, I sometimes said no, I have plans. Sometimes those plans were just a nap. They still counted. He didn't like it, but he adjusted. He had to. For the first time in his life, his mother was not a bottomless well he could dip into whenever he pleased. One evening, as the sun slid low and painted the houses across the street in soft gold, I stepped out onto my small porch. I wrapped a light cardigan around my shoulders and breathed in the cool air. Kids' voices floated up and down the block, bike tires clicking over cracks in the sidewalk. Somewhere, someone was grilling, the faint smell of smoke and seasoning drifting on the breeze. I thought of all the women sitting at their own tables right then, listening in their kitchens or living rooms, folding laundry, stirring pots, their hearts pounding for reasons their families didn't see. Women who had been told they were too much or too needy or too forgetful. Women who had sacrificed everything and were now being told they were in the way. I didn't get the storybook ending. My son did not fall to his knees in tears. There was no dramatic hug in the rain, no music swelling over our reconciliation. What I got instead was my dignity back, my name on my own papers, my voice in my own mouth. And I realized, standing on that porch with the sky turning pink and gold, that was the only happy ending I ever truly had the power to write. So, if you're listening to me now, folding towels or washing dishes, wondering if you're overreacting or if you're allowed to be tired, I'll leave you with this.
Child, the day you let your grown kids talk to you like you're already buried, you might as well hand them the shovel. Set your boundaries before they start digging.